I'm Ted, Hateful Darkblack on the Weird Forums, and I'm here today to talk about Hamelin the Plagued, a master in the game Malifaux. Hamelin is a model that you can think of as a rising catastrophe, and that takes two effects that both feed into each other. The first is blighted, and the second is the spread of Malifaux Rats. So Hamelin has two attacks. There's a pipes attack that is a long-range attack resisted with defense, even though it seems like it would be resisted with willpower. It's resisted with defense that pulls enemies closer, and it can do damage. And there's a trigger on an upgrade that will give it blighted. He's also got a close-ranged attack that will do damage and give blighted. And furthermore, with a different upgrade, he can actually cause things to obey, which doesn't really affect blighted. It just gives you more control over things. Hamelin is really good for using that blighted. One thing he can do with the blighted is he has an attack called Bleeding Disease that does damage to a model equal to the number of blighted it has. So every time the blighted increases, you're potentially going to be taking more damage when he uses Bleeding Disease. Blighted on its own doesn't do anything. Blighted just, every turn, if you have any blighted, you gain one more blighted. So if you start and get blighted 1 on turn 1, then by turn 5 you'll have 5 blighted, unless something attacks you and you get even more blighted. Towards the end of the game, that blighted can become a very big problem, because many of the models in the crew can give blighted, and many of them can do things to you with blighted, especially Bleeding Disease. Hamelin also has an ability related to the Malifaux Rats, that within 6 inches of him, if an enemy model or a friendly model with blighted on it dies, is killed or sacrificed, you summon a Malifaux Rat in base contact. So as time goes by, you get more and more rats. Hamelin also has a few defenses. First of all, he has a upgrade that enemy models can't end charges within 6 inches of him, which protects him and his crew from charges. He also has a special ability, though, that if he dies, you can actually sacrifice a nearby stolen, and that will stop him from dying and get rid of the stolen instead, and instead he will heal 4 damage. So those stolen, you can hire one stolen. They're his totem. And we're going to now talk about the stolen. The stolen are Hamelin's totem. He can hire one. He can summon one more as a 0 action. He can actually summon 2 more as a 0 action if he spends a soul stone and gets a tome and a mask. The stolen are children who have been lured away by Hamelin. By the way, the name Hamelin is, of course, the town where the legendary Pied Piper led away the rats, and then when he wasn't paid, led away the children. So that's kind of the underlying history of this whole thing. The stolen can do a few things. One, when they die, whether it's because you sacrificed them or because an enemy killed them, living models within 3 inches have to make a fairly easy willpower duel or they get paralyzed. This is occasionally disastrous for the enemy because it can either drain a bunch of cards or paralyze them. Many crews can ignore that. The stolen also can cast Bleeding Disease, which is very nice. If the stolen die, they leave a rat behind, so you don't mind quite as much as when they die. Or, as a 2 action, the stolen can actually kill itself and bring in 2 rats in its place. So, let's talk about these rats. Malifaux Rats. Malifaux Rats are the adorable and actually fairly individually harmless models that scurry around Hamelin and his crew. They have a melee attack that does 0/0/1 damage, which is to say, on severe it does 1 damage, otherwise it does none at all. But it gives blighted, and it gives a lot of blighted. Either 1, 2, or 3 blighted, depending on how much damage you do. Malifaux Rats only have a 4 melee when they attack, but when they swarm around a thing, they get bonuses to attack. However, when they swarm around a thing, they also, if you ever start an activation with a Malifaux Rat, and it's within 3 inches of 3 more Malifaux Rats, you get rid of the Malifaux Rat and bring in a Rat King. You don't have a choice in the matter. If it's within 3 inches of 3 or more Malifaux Rats, all of those rats go away, and you bring in a Rat King. However, you can kind of control it by pacing out which rats you activate and moving them in just such a way so that they don't turn into the Rat King until you want them to. Now let's talk about the Rat King. So the Rat King is another German rat myth, because apparently there are a lot of German rat myths. It's a creature called the Rattenkönig, which is just German for Rat King, which is a bunch of rats that get their tails tied together, so they're all kind of tied up into this giant creature. In terms of Malifaux, however, Rat Kings, unlike Malifaux Rats, which are peons, Rat Kings are minions, so they can take interact actions and help work on schemes, and in fact they're great at it. So the thing that they're really, really good at is defending against enemy schemes. They have an ability, so when they're summoned, of course, the turn they're summoned, they can't take interact actions, because you can't interact the turn you're summoned. But they can, if there is an enemy scheme marker within 5 inches, as a 0 action, move to that scheme marker and destroy it. That's their gnaw ability. So if you have an enemy with scheme markers and you're worried they're going to plant explosives or spring the trap or get some VP or accomplish something, you can deploy a Rat King to gobble it up and stop it from happening. Rat Kings are great for that. They also can charge models that have Blighted as a 1 action instead of a 2 action. They get a positive twist on their attacks if they're at half wounds or more. If they end in base contact with a model, that model has to make a check or it becomes slow. So there's a lot of fairly good attack abilities. They don't have a lot of defense abilities, but they do have one very nice summoning that they can do as a 1 action. And they can do that the turn they're summoned if you want them to, if they've already, say, devoured the stuff that you wanted them to devour. That is a 1 action that will summon, dissolve the Rat King, and summon instead a Malifaux Rat and a Rat Catcher. So let's talk about the Rat Catcher. The Rat Catcher is, in theory, a Rat Catcher is something that will kill a rat for you and stop a plague problem. But this is Malifaux and bad things happen. So in fact, Rat Catchers are pretty much spreading rats and working with the rats to make more money off of people. They have a pretty good melee attack that does some damage and gives Blighted, because of course you want to give everything Blighted, your Hamelin's crew. That also has some triggers on their melee attack, one of which summons a rat into base contact with whatever you're targeting, one of which gives slow, and one of which doesn't give Blighted but does some more damage. The Rat Catcher can also give Reactivate to a rat or Rat King as a spell, and it can, it doesn't have bleeding disease, but like Hamelin, any enemy model or friendly model with Blighted near it which is killed or sacrificed, you summon a rat in base contact. So it's another way to summon rats, and it's another way to boost rats in a variety of ways. Rat Catchers also get armor equal to the number of rats in base contact with them, and they have a 0 action to just pull a bunch of rats next to them. That's the Rat Catcher. Another model in the crew is the Obedient Wretch. The Obedient Wretch is kind of like a Super Stolen. It has bleeding disease. It has the same ability to disintegrate into 2 rats, the same ability to be very upsetting when it dies because you realize that you've just killed a kid and it's very sad. They also have a ranged attack. And the ranged attack does a little bit of damage. It's called Tossed Rat. But it can also, on a crow, again summon a rat into base contact with whatever you hit. So this leads to the ability to just spread more rats, spread more Blighted, and eventually it usually ends up dissolving into a rat, to rats itself. That's the Obedient Wretch. The last member of the crew I want to talk about, and I'm talking only about the core crew here. There are other models. Hamelin can hire other outcast models, of course. He can also, with the Sewer King upgrade, higher Lost models, which include Crueligans, Candy, Baby Cade, and in general a whole bunch of kid models, because there's that whole luring away the kids motif that he has. But the last one is Nyx the Bull Terrier. Nyx is a henchman and is incorporeal. He only has 6 wounds, but he takes half damage from melee and shooting attacks. Casting attacks are usually the easiest way to take him down because he doesn't have damage from those. The thing about Nyx is, from a defensive perspective, is he's really, really hard to kill. He's quite tenacious because anytime an enemy model fails a duel for any reason within 3 inches of him, he heals one of those 6 wounds. So if you do 5 attacks for 2 damage each, that's 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, 1 damage, and he's down to 1 wound. He can heal that back completely if you fail 5 times around him. And that's swinging at him, swinging at something else, trying to cast a spell and failing. If you cast a spell on one of your guys and relent, the one who's relented counts as failing, so Nyx gets to heal. So he's got a lot of healing, and that makes him very, very tenacious. He can also cast Bleeding Disease, and he's quite good at it. He's as good as Hamelin at it. He's got a casting of 6. He doesn't summon rats, but he does spread plague, and he's quite good at spreading plague. He can pulse an aura around himself as a 0 action, where a bunch of models need to make a very difficult TN 15 willpower duel, or they game blighted. And the ones close to him, of course, if they fail that very difficult duel, he gets to heal some more, because he's Nyx and he's very tenacious. He has an upgrade that lets him do 2 things. One thing he can do is he can actually hire hounds from other factions, which pretty much means guild hounds and canine remains. The other thing he can do is, with that upgrade, he can make an aura around himself where anything, any friendly models are immune to pulses, blasts, and auras. And this can be very, very helpful because Hamelin often has a lot of models around him. And so he can be a little vulnerable to area attacks. Nyx the Bull Terrier will help protect against that. So that's the crew. And before we sign out completely, I kind of want to walk through a summoning cycle to show you how it can operate. There's a thing that Hamelin is very, very good at that most other crews aren't, which is he can get a lot of extra activations. And that means that if you want to do something and you want to make sure you're last in the turn so your opponent can't react to it, you can do it with Hamelin. I'm going to walk through an example of that to show just how many activations he can get. We're going to start with 4 models. Hamelin, an obedient wretch, a rat catcher, and Nyx. So let's start. Hamelin, we're going to say Hamelin takes a turn, and on Hamelin's turn he does a bunch of stuff, and then he summons a Stolen into base contact. Then, so that's 1 activation. The Stolen then takes its turn, and actually in this case this Stolen couldn't do it, but let's say you have another Stolen there. This Stolen dissolves into 2 rats. Sorry about that. We now have, then that Stolen goes and does something. This rat activates and that rat activates. We've now taken 4 activations. Now let's have this rat catcher go. This rat catcher takes a swing at this rat, summons another rat. This rat activates and does nothing. Then we say the obedient wretch takes an activation and use tossed rat on one of these rats. Summons out another rat. We've now done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 activations. These rats, this last rat activates, and because there are 3 rats close enough to it, it summons the Rat King. The Rat King takes its turn, maybe moves into base contact with an enemy marker, maybe not, and then summons another rat catcher, and a Malifaux Rat. The rat catcher then gives reactivate to that rat. That rat acts once, acts twice. We've now gone, I think, 12 or 13 activations, way more than any enemy crew will have. And we did this when we were starting with just 18 soulstones worth of models. And then after all of this, Nyx, who is the person that you actually wanted to do things with, he doesn't summon rats or anything. He just then goes and delivers the message or drops a counter for a Spring the Trap or whatever you want to have him do. So in this example here, it kind of shows that Hamelin can do a lot of summons. So the way the crew fits together as a whole, Hamelin is kind of the center of the crew. He controls a lot of models around him. He lures enemies in. You often end up with a cluster of models around Hamelin because he can pull things in and because he protects his own models. Then you have the Stolen, who kind of act as extra lives for Hamelin. They've only got one life, they're easy to kill, but they can dissolve into rats, they can cause Bleeding Plague, they can spread Blighted. You have the rats, which everything summon. Individually, they're not very powerful, but they can take up activations, they can spread Blighted, and when you get 4 of them together, 4 or more of them together, you can get a rat pack. Sorry, a rat king, I just named mine the pack. The Rat King is quite good at offense, so-so at defense, great at destroying enemy scheme markers, and it can summon a Rat Catcher and another rat. The Rat Catchers are good at, they synergize with rats, they can make rats activate more, they have some pretty good attacks, and they make more rats. The Obedient Wretch also makes more rats, and then Nyx doesn't really interact with rats much, but he spreads Blighted, he's very tenacious and hard to kill, and he can protect the rest of the crew from area attacks with his upgrade. So that's been a description of Hamelin the Plagued and the whole Plagued crew. I hope this has been interesting for you, whether it's because you are interested in possibly playing him yourself, or because you might want to know what it's like to play against him. I hope you enjoy this. Please let me know what you think. And enjoy the inevitability of the spreading plague. Thanks. Bye.